On today's Locked On Texans podcast, one of the talk of the towns and discussions have been, should Houston go after a marquee D lineman in this free agency? We'll look at that and realistic odds for the Super Bowl for the Houston Texans.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Locked On Texans fans and listeners to this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If this is your first time listening or watching the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts and listen to them. If you are one of our returning listeners, thank you for coming back as Cody and I continue to talk Texans here on the Locked On Texans podcast. On the other side of the screen, Texans Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. And you guys know me, Texans football analyst, John Some Sports Guy Hickman. Today we're looking at a second coach leaving from DeMeco Ryans' coaching staff. If you haven't heard by now, Shane Day went back to the Chargers, which I think, ideally probably works out best, especially with John Harbaugh going over there. Realistic odds for the Super Bowl for next year. I know this is the way too early conversation. We'll dive into that. However, we opened up today's show looking at free agent targets on the D-line. Before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started today. Cody, when you look at the Houston Texans, and this whole week we've kind of talked about, at least when we look at the last couple of episodes, the importance of analyzing the cap space in its totality. A lot of money is out there, 60+ million for Houston, but they do have 28 pending free agents. By the way, they have until, I definitely want to give you guys this important bit of information. They have until the 19th of February to re-sign or work out a contract extension, rather. Sheldon Rankins, Dalton Schultz, Jerry Hughes, Steven Nelson, and Derek Barnett, and they have until March 12th, the day after free agency kicks off, to work out a deal with Kaimi Fairbairn. Until then, after that, if they don't get a deal worked out and taken care of, then those contracts become void and they will be free agents, unrestricted free agents. So when you look at what Houston has going on, potential targets for this defensive line, if they choose to move on from Sheldon Rankins, even if they choose to maybe look at the idea of trading Malik Collins, which would potentially save them some money. And I'll look at that when I swing back to me. But what players are on your free agent list, Cody?
When you take a look at the top of the tier free agent list, who can the Houston Texans get? You still have people out there dreaming of Mike Evans. John, you and I think the top of our free agency wish list is Saquon Barkley. You have some people, something you have also played around with the idea. They would love to pair Derek Stingley Jr. with one of the top tier cornerbacks that's going to be out there on the open market. But John, every time we talk about top tier players, who can the Houston Texans sign? I know this is probably the third time this week I didn't say this, but I'll always go back to what Coach DeMeco Ryans has always highlighted throughout this entire season. Ever since training camp, as a matter of fact, every time he's asked about the roster, every time he's asked about how you going to defend a Lamar Jackson, or how you going to defend Derrick Henry, how you going to improve stopping the run, and all this other good stuff. Who are some of the players out there on the waiver wire you would like to pick up? What positions you want to see more from, regardless of how good they're already looking? He always go back to that it starts up front on the defensive side of the ball, on that defensive line. And John, if there is one area that I can truly see Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans saying, you know what, let's just splash out in free agency right here, is going to be on that defensive front. And I came to that realization, not only taking a look at what Coach DeMeco Ryans values the most on the defensive side of the ball, but just in general, knowing that the Houston Texans, regardless of how good everything looks last year, that is still an area that can even get better. And when I take a look at this free agency class list, and I'm looking at it from a standpoint, okay, if the Houston Texans are for real about contending, if the Houston Texans are for real about making that next leap, and if Coach DeMeco Ryans gets an opportunity to get his way, we might start hearing some realistic rumors about the Houston Texans going after Chris Jones, reunited with DJ Reader, who, by the way, I would love that because, that is a guy that you and I have been talking about how much his departure has hurt this franchise. He is still valuable, and he is somebody that can actually improve the Houston Texans interior on that defensive front. But there are several guys, John, that I'm looking at, and I'm thinking to myself, I would not be surprised if we definitely start to hear rumblings that the Houston Texans are interested in this guy, interested in that guy. And, it kind of goes hand in hand, as in, what are you going to do with the Sheldon Rankins? What you going to do with the Jonathan Grenards? I can see a situation where if they can get Jonathan Grenard on a friendly contract, then that's definitely going to give them an opportunity to splash out more in free agency to improve their defensive front, especially if they're targeting somebody like a Chris Jones, like a DJ Reader, who can definitely help improve your interior on the defensive side of the ball. Plus, even if you have an opportunity to keep Sheldon Rankins, you could keep him as more so of those situational type purposes where you need him only to stop the run or whatever the case might be. Like, I don't be surprised if the Texans put a lot of effort into boosting that defensive line, even though it looked damn good during the 2023 season, especially when everybody was healthy.
Yeah. So before I talk about my take, I do want to say that the Houston Texans can save, according to Spot Rack, roughly $6 million, north of $6 million, if they look to trade Malik Collins. Now, yesterday I talked about the potential of moving on from Robert Woods combined with MJ Stewart. You would save, again, estimate roughly $7.5 million there. Add on an additional north of $6 million. You're looking at different ways to create additional cap space. And I say that because we all have our favorites, like guys you would definitely want to see here in Houston because you just love their game and you love the name that comes with it. But understandably so, we also mentioned that there are 28 pending free agents that needs to be either re-signed or you find replacements for those players. And some of those guys are very important. John Bernard, Dalton Schultz, we talked about it yesterday. But I think at some point we have to look at one big marquee player, right? And if for Houston, if you are going to look at that and say, well, if you look at the Super Bowl, the trenches really dominated. Both quarterbacks had difficult times throughout that game to get anything going. As a matter of fact, in the name I'm about to say, Chief Chris Jones, who has rumored been leaked to Houston, coming to Houston, who would rumored to make around $20 to $22 million. I mean, he dominated in that game without a sack, and that just shows you how important it is to have a dominant force up front. If you go back and look at some of the major miscues from Brock Purdy, some of those missed TDs, look and see who's around. It's Chris Jones. And so what I'm getting at is for Houston, they're going to have to spend money, open the bank for somebody. Has to be. And if we're looking at guys that are not on this roster, if we're not looking at in-home talent like a John Grenard, I'm looking at outside guys. The two names that I will look at, number one, Justin Madubuike from the Baltimore Ravens, projected to make north of $20 million. He would be worth it. I want to say 9 sacks this past year for the Baltimore Ravens, was surrounded with talent amongst that defensive line. So if he comes here to Houston, what player do we know will be here? Will Anderson, right? And I think if you look at bringing him in, a guy that as dominant as he can be up front in the middle with Will Anderson, I think for Houston it makes sense to bring back Derek Barnett, and then maybe you look to draft a younger guy. I can't say what their game plan would be, but the pieces are already here for Houston. Rookie of the year defensively, a savvy vet, Derek Barnett, who is a free agent, but I don't expect that he would make a lot of money. But also I look at Chris Jones, a dominant D tackle who can really wreck a game. Those two guys can wreck games from the inside, okay? And so I think I'm looking at the true value of what this defense needs. For offense, I think you could plug in some other guys. Right? You could plug in. I still think if you sign Justin Madubuike, you can still get Saquon because you'll either move on from some of these guys or, again, like we talked about, rework some contracts. But if you can get a game record in the middle, that does so much for your edge defenders. Because now you got somebody that absolutely needs to be double teamed. And so somebody's getting freed up on the edge. That does wonders for your linebacker because now I don't have to worry about a guard or maybe a tackle, maybe pulling or just coming up to the second level easily, freely. Now there's some real back and forth going on. They fighting in them trenches, and that allows your Christian Harris, your Blake Cashman, your Henry To'oTo'o, who's still on a rookie contract, or whoever else they bring in. That allows those linebackers an easier opportunity to flow in and out of gaps and sideline to sideline. And if you're getting that pressure up front from your front seven, well, now you're looking at a secondary who already features Derek Stingley having an easier time because now you get some of these quarterbacks off rhythm because of the pressure that's getting thrown in their face. And then you're looking at some of those turnovers that they can create because of bad decisions. So whether it's one side of the ball or the other side of the ball, right now the topic is free agent targets that are already out there. And I think I'm not going to look at some of the lower tier guys. I'm going to look at the top tier guys for Houston because we've seen what a defense can do for you. And you already have a quarterback who is the complete opposite of a game manager. You just give him some talent out there, guys that can get open. Don't need to necessarily be big names. He'll go out there and win you some games. He did it once, he can do it again. Defensively, if you're going to open up your pocketbook on any of these guys at any phase of this defense, I will look at the defensive line, like you said, Cody, and go that route. Outside of if you have an opportunity to get Antoine Whitfield, because I think he is that damn good of a football player at that safety position.
Really quick, I want to throw one more name at you that I'm looking at. Christian Wilkins from Miami. This is a guy over the last 2 years. He has played really well as a defensive tackle. And not only that, you're looking at a situation over the last 2 seasons when they moved him from the outside to the inside of that D-line. He has recorded 12 and a half sacks, and it's probably going to work in the Texans' favor more so because he's in Miami. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the year or maybe next year they're going to have to pay Tua, which means they're going to have to let some of their guys walk out the door. So Christian Wilkins is a guy that I can definitely see that I would love for the Houston Texans to get as of right now. His market value as of right now, following a career season last year, his market value is at $20 million. So look, John, put it like this. I would love for you to get one of the top tier defensive linemen, but it has to be somebody that's going to improve your interior. That way, you can honestly get Jonathan Grenard on a hometown discount, and then you'll have a defensive line unit that would feature, let's say for the sake of this argument, Christian Wilkins, Will Anderson Jr., and Jonathan Grenard. That right there will be a dream scenario for me.
And I think for Houston, if you do look towards moving on from John Grenard, or a deal just wasn't able to get worked out that was both team and player friendly, right, for both sides, AJ Epinanza from the Buffalo Bills, right now he's projected, according to Spot Rack, estimate. I don't want to put a definitive number on some of these contracts. It's just, give or take a little bit, I guess. I'll say that. Right now, you're looking at 2 years, $11.2 million, $5.6 million per year. I think that's doable. When you look at what he was able to accomplish last year, 7 sacks, 18 hurries, 29 total pressures, and you're looking at a guy who was not always featured on the defensive side of the ball and played very good for the Buffalo Bills. And so look at 7 sacks in back-to-back years, came into the league, 4 sacks his first 2 years, 14 in the last 2 years. He's gotten better and better as a football player. He could be very, how can I put it? He could be impactful for this Houston Texans defense and possibly be a part of replicating him and combined with maybe a Barnett, the same success John Grenard had, or maybe being featured in more games. When I look at AJ, he's played in let's see. He's been a backup, but he's been featured in almost every game he's played in since he's coming to the league. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this latest installment of Locked On Texans. By the way, later on today, we're going to have an opportunity to talk to Andre Johnson. He's going to have his Hall of Fame press conference with Houston media. So you guys already know the drill. I'm pretty sure we're going to highlight something to close off tomorrow's show. And then, of course, all throughout the day, whether in writing, whether with videos on social media, you guys are with. It's going to be exciting because this is going to be the first time we hear from Mr. Andre Johnson since he has been inducted. Well, since he was selected to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So once again, man, shout out to Andre Johnson. John, I'm going to let you know right now, this is something I'm going to celebrate throughout the whole entire offseason, just so you know. But, continue here on this latest installment of Locked On Texans. The one thing about the Houston Texans, having a promising head coach, promising coordinators, promising position coaches, promising quarterback, promising defense, the offensive rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year, players taking leaps several career seasons. A lot of people are excited about the Houston Texans these days, and rightfully so. And of course, after Kansas City won the Super Bowl, we started seeing way too early odds for Super Bowl 25 that's going to take place inside of New Orleans, which, by the way, I'm just saying, if the Texans do make it, I think that's going to be home field advantage for them because the drive is not that far away from the city of Houston when you go down to New Orleans. I know because I've been taking that drive for majority of my entire life. But with that being said, John, I think when you look at the Texans, and look, let me go ahead and say my disclaimer. Those of you guys that's been rocking with the show know that there are certain things that I say and predict. I hope I'm wrong because it works out in the team's favor without a shadow of a doubt. But when I take a look at some of these way too early odds for the Houston Texans and their Super Bowl odds for next season, I just feel like they're too unrealistic. Don't get me wrong. I think if everything goes right for the Texans next season, you talk about health, you talk about several players taking that leap like we expected them to, Coach D'Amico Ryans and his staff getting better. I do believe that the Houston Texans can go from a playoff caliber team to a championship contending team. However, John, when I take a look at some of these odds, like I can't remember which one it was. It might have been on the Athletic where I saw the Texans high Super Bowl odds for next season was like 7th. And I'm like, look, there's nowhere in the world that I can see the Houston Texans having the 7th best odds of winning or at least going to the Super Bowl. So I do just want to play around just for fun. What would be a realistic chance for the Texans to make the big game next season? Because I think the one thing that everybody get caught up in is at the end of the day, you have the quarterback. And that quarterback, of course, is CJ.
That's a good thing to get caught up in. So, but are we looking at what needs to take place, or?
Yeah, just as of right now, before we get the free agency, the draft, and all that other stuff. As of right now, is it realistic for this team to go to New Orleans next season?
Anything's possible.
All right,
anything is possible, but I think year 2 you're going to look at the entire league, 31 other teams. In this case for CJ, 17 games, 17 different teams having more tape on you now. Mm-hmm. Understanding what you excel at, and if there is something that they think is a weakness, what are your weaknesses? It's going to take, so you got to look at that aspect. Year 2 for quarterbacks a lot of times are where they kind of slump. And I'm not putting that on CJ. I'm just looking at the odds. The odds say that in year 2, you look at quarterbacks having a difficult time replicating success if they were successful from year 1 in year 2. I think for Houston, they got to catch up with the time still offensively.
Mm-hmm.
So they cannot just like I hate the conversation. Well, they already got Tank and Nico. All you got to do is no, you can't do that. You cannot do that, right? Whether you go out there and it via draft, the free agency, investing in your quarterback is the way to go. Once you get to the big game, yeah, you want your defense to dog it out, but you got to get there first. And you got to invest into that, and you got to look at the defensive side of the ball. They got to be able to stop the pass. So I know I said a lot, but guys, realistically, anything can happen. But it's too early for me to say we haven't even got to March 13th yet, and the end of free agency. We haven't got there yet. We haven't got to the free agency period. Draft, you can kind of hold off and make more presumptions after free agency because that's when you start to kind of really fill your team out. This team only has 3 7th rounders, 1 pick in each round outside of the 6th round, I believe, as of right now. 7th rounders, are you expecting them to make your roster? 5th rounders, may have an opportunity to make it or break it, but you also got guys from last year under contract who may not make the roster. You got 28 free agents. Like, there's a lot that needs to go on in free agency in terms of bringing in and retaining. This team needs to do a very good job of. Once we get to that point, I can make a better assumption. But they have to make a fuller team before we can really say, oh, yeah, this team can, they can make it to the Super Bowl. With CJ, yeah, anything's possible, but he can't do it by himself.
Yeah, that is true.
52 others to get it done.
That is true, John. But even when I was looking at, the realistic Super Bowl odds for this team next season, I also started just thinking just a little bit more like, I wonder what is this championship window for the Houston Texans will look like for, let's say, the next 3 to 4 seasons, because and I kind of broke it down in different ways. First of all, I looked at the last regime of the Houston Texans when you had Deshaun, JJ, and D-Hop and all of them. It was like, I don't know, too many people really viewed them as a championship caliber team. Yes, they have the talent, but like we always say, the coaching just always held that team back. So it was like, okay, they was never for real contenders. Then I look at it from a standpoint, will they be a team like Baltimore, Dallas, Buffalo, to where they're always going to have these remarkable regular season runs and stuff and win 10, 11, 12, 13 games. But when you get into the playoffs, something always happens and you always fall short of getting to the big game. And I think when people look at the Houston Texans, especially looking at what type of jump that they can possibly take next season, a lot of them looking at them like how they view Cincinnati. And I understand Cincinnati was a little bit more shocking, but for them, rookie season, Joe Burrow, what they won like 5 games, if that, before he got hurt. And then next thing you know, you blinked your eyes and it was a couple plays away from winning their first championship in franchise history. So, it's just one of those situations where it's exciting when you talk about what the Houston Texans can be, because it like we've been saying ever since the end of the regular season, they definitely have their foundation set. It is set, it is settled, and this team is going to be on to something special for the next 4 to 5 years. However, John, to your point, they're going to have to build, and at the same time, they're going to have to make sure that they revamp, retool every single year, because to your point, next year, not only do they have tape on CJ and Will and Nico and all of them, they're coming for them as well. It's no longer, we just playing pause. They are on people calendar. Like, people are starting to get up for the Texans because this is going to be a marquee team that's coming to ruin the party for some of these quote unquote championship contender teams as of right now.
Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. Is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Listen, whether you are into speed, power, style, or all three, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and you're not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP of the road and bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, we look at another coach leaving D'Amico Ryan's coaching staff. And that's Shane Day, who is going back to the LA Chargers. He served as a senior offensive assistant for the Houston Texans this past season. And again, he will return back to LA under head coach Jim Harbaugh as a quarterback's coach. They had already had experience coaching Justin Herbert, so he's going to return back there. And now for Houston, senior offensive assistant, they will be in need of one of those. And this is not for me, but I always thought it was a very good talking point once Shane Day was moved on from. This Eric Bieniemy gets a look from this organization. He will not be brought back for the Washington Commanders. He was never considered to be their head coach. I still think that's asinine. But do you promote somebody in-house, or would you look to bring in and kind of build a super squad? Look at bringing in Eric Bieniemy to be a part of your offensive staff. I don't know. I think that would be smart, especially if Shane Day was still here. I would look at that move as kind of somewhat just not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But now that Day is gone, why not?
I ain't gonna lie, you threw me for a loop. Wow.
And by the way, that's from John. John Crumpler was the first one to bring that up. And at first, again, I was like, well, we got Shane Day here already and Bill Lazor. But now with that vacancy, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Look, first of all, let me say this. I haven't really studied a lot of Eric Bieniemy since, what was that, 2021? After the 2020 season, right before they hired Nick Caserio during that time. When Deshaun was vouching for him and stuff, that's when I did a lot of studying and stuff on Eric Bieniemy. Then we all know everything just went left after that. And I don't know, John. I don't know. Like every time I hear Eric Bieniemy's name, I feel for that man because there is no way in the world why he isn't somebody's coordinator, definitely not somebody's head coach. And then two, most importantly, man, look, no shot at him, but I also think Kansas City sustained in their dynasty actually hurt him as well. And I know a lot of people. One of the main
conversation was, what did he do? What did they fall off? What did he contribute?
Play calling. What did he orchestrate and all this other stuff? And it's just like, man, I don't know, man. Like, I would just love let me just say this. I would love for the Texans to bring Eric Bieniemy in if they honestly feel like if his football mind can take them to that extra step. Because just like what we just finished talking about in the second segment, like people are going to have film on CJ, they're going to have film on Bobby Sloyd's play calling, and all this other stuff. So it's like, maybe you do just to make sure you get that extra edge. And then if you bring Eric Bieniemy here next season, Bobby Sloyd probably definitely going to be leaving. So do you kind of like elevate him to offensive coordinator? I don't know. And I think if you bring him in, that's going to be the next thing. Where is he the next offensive coordinator in waiting?
No, I still think that's going to be Coach Johnson. And I think
that's going to be the next issue. I say no, man.
But I will say this. When you look at his resume as a coach, UCLA running backs coach, Minnesota Vikings running backs coach, back when he had AP, Colorado offensive coordinator, but look at some of the success running backs has had under Coach Bieniemy, adding him to this coaching staff, I think would add an element to the running game that he could help be successful with or bring to this team. So just a thought, but Shane Day is no longer a Houston Texan, a part of this coaching staff. He went back to LA to be with the Chargers. Shout out to Coach Day. In his role this year, I think he fielded well. Thank you guys for listening and watching the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube. Give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
As always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.